January 26, 1875, 3 in the morning. Kearney, Missouri. The farmhouse window exploded inward. Zerelda Samuel, Jesse James's mother, woke to the sound of shattering glass and saw a cast iron ball rolling across her kitchen floor, smoking like hell itself. Her husband dove for it. 8-year-old Archie sat up in bed. The device detonated with a blast that neighbors said sounded like the Civil War had come back. Archie Samuel died instantly, his small body shredded by shrapnel. Zerelda's right arm hung in tatters below the elbow. The local doctor would amputate it at dawn. The cast iron stove, warm from dinner hours before, lay blown across the room. Jesse James was 200 miles away, robbing a train, with no idea the Pinkertons had just bombed his family. This wasn't about justice anymore. This was revenge, and it would reshape American outlaw legend forever. By 1874, Jesse James had become the most wanted man in America without spending a single day in prison. 7 bank robberies, 4 train heists, 0 convictions. Post-Civil War Missouri was a powder keg of Confederate sympathizers and Unionist enforcers, and Jesse moved through it like smoke. He'd learned guerrilla warfare under William Quantrill and Bloody Bill Anderson during the war. Brutal tactics, lightning strikes, vanish before the law arrives. That training made him untouchable. The railroad companies, bleeding money from his hits, hired the Pinkerton National Detective Agency with unlimited budget and one directive: end this. Allen Pinkerton had built his reputation cracking the Lincoln assassination case. His agents were the best in the country. But Jesse wasn't just smart, he was invisible. And that drove Pinkerton into obsession. At the James family farm outside Kearney, life continued as if the war had ended. Zerelda Samuel cooked breakfast every morning on the same cast iron stove, routine and ordinary. She had no idea it would become evidence. The Samuel farm stretched across 100 acres of Missouri clay, Zerelda's domain. She was fiercely protective, an ex-Confederate sympathizer who'd buried one husband and raised sons in a war that never quite finished. Her third husband, Dr. Reuben Samuel, was a quiet physician who kept his head down and treated neighbors without asking their politics. The children, Archie, 8 years old, and his half-siblings, grew up knowing Jesse's name was dangerous and sacred at once. Jesse visited in secret, never staying more than a night. Neighbors would die before informing. The farm was sanctuary, the last place Jesse could breathe without looking over his shoulder. Zerelda's routine never changed. Wake before dawn, light the cast iron stove, cook enough to feed whoever showed up. That stove had been in the family for years, a reliable piece of iron that held heat through Missouri winters. It sat in the main room, the heart of the house. If you wanted warmth, you gathered near it. In a month, it would be blown across the room, shrapnel-scarred and silent. December 1874, and the intelligence came in wrong. A Pinkerton informant reported Jesse James was hiding at the family farm. A solid lead, they thought. The problem: Jesse was in Kentucky with his gang, nowhere near Kearney. Allen Pinkerton didn't care. By then, he'd lost 2 agents in brutal ambushes. John Witcher, sent undercover, was found dead on a roadside. Lewis Lull died in a shootout with Jesse's crew. The raids, the stakeouts, the traps, all failures. The railroad executives were losing patience and money. Their message to Pinkerton was clear: end this now, we don't care how. So Pinkerton authorized extreme measures. In a Chicago workshop, a special device was commissioned: a hollow iron shell, 15 pounds, filled with flammable liquid and Greek fire compound. The official plan: throw it through the window, create smoke, force evacuation, capture anyone who runs. The reality: nobody asked what would happen if the device exploded in a house full of sleeping people. 8 agents were selected for the raid. The plan was simple, reckless, and about to become a national scandal. January 1875, and Pinkerton agents spent 3 weeks in the Missouri cold, watching the Samuel farm from positions in the tree line. They tracked every movement: Zerelda cooking breakfast, Dr. Samuel tending patients, children playing in the yard. No sign of Jesse or his brother Frank. Daily reports went back to Chicago. Suspects not present. Pinkerton's response never wavered: proceed anyway, send a message. The agents were cold, frustrated, ready for action. They'd been promised a confrontation and got surveillance duty instead. Kearney locals noticed strangers lingering near the property, but Confederate loyalty ran deep. Nobody talked. Every night, the cast iron stove glowed through the farmhouse window, visible from the tree line. The agents watched that light like a target. By late January, the order came down. Execute the raid. The goal had shifted from capture to terror. If they couldn't get Jesse, they'd make sure his family understood the cost of protecting him. It was a decision that would haunt American law enforcement for generations. The iron device sat in an agent's saddlebag, waiting. Inside the farmhouse, Zerelda prepared dinner, unaware that her ordinary evening routine was being documented by men who'd already decided her fate. The smell of cornbread drifted through the broken tree line. The temperature dropped, and 8 men tightened their positions around a family that had committed no crime except loyalty. The device arrived from Chicago in a wooden crate, packed in straw like farm equipment. Special Pinkerton issue, a hollow iron ball designed to create chaos without being traced to a specific weapon. Filled with flammable liquid mixed with Greek fire, a compound that burned white hot and couldn't be extinguished with water. The official description called it a smoke producer. The real design was closer to a small bomb. It weighed 15 pounds, roughly the size of a bowling ball, with a fuse mechanism that activated on impact. Agent instructions were direct. Throw it into the main room, wait for occupants to evacuate, apprehend anyone who exits. What nobody considered: wooden farmhouse, sleeping children, elderly occupants with no escape plan. The device looked innocent enough, just another piece of cast iron, similar to stove components farmers used every day. That similarity was deliberate. If questions were asked later, Pinkerton could claim it was meant to be non-lethal. But anyone who handled it knew the truth. This thing was built to terrify, and terror doesn't follow safety protocols. Lead agent Jack Ladd examined the device the night before the raid, turning it over in his hands. The metal was cold, industrial, manufactured in a Chicago foundry that probably had no idea what its product would be used for. The fuse smelled like sulfur and kerosene. Ladd had conducted dozens of raids, arrested bank robbers and train thieves, faced armed resistance. But this felt different. This wasn't law enforcement. This was war brought to a civilian doorstep. He packed it carefully, said nothing to his team, and waited for darkness. January 25th, 1875, 11 at night, and 8 Pinkerton agents moved into position around the Samuel farm like soldiers taking a battlefield. The temperature had dropped to 12 degrees, snow crunching under their boots. Lead agent Jack Ladd, a Pinkerton veteran who'd tracked outlaws across 3 states, gave the final orders. Break the window, throw the device, cover all exits with rifles. Wait. Inside, the family was asleep. Zerelda and Dr. Samuel in their bedroom. Archie and the other children tucked in for the night, warm under quilts their mother had stitched. The cast iron stove in the main room still held warmth from dinner, the embers barely glowing, a soft orange light against the winter darkness. The agents carried no warrant, no legal authority for what they were about to do. This was a private operation funded by railroad money, executing outside the law with the quiet blessing of men who wanted results, not trials. No announcement, no warning, just the crack of glass and the hiss of a fuse. Ladd positioned himself near the window, device in hand, feeling its weight. 15 pounds of iron and chemicals. The plan assumed panic, confusion, and capture. It never accounted for what actually happens when you throw an explosive into a house full of people who have nowhere to run. Around him, the other agents took positions at doors and corners, rifles ready. The farmhouse sat quiet, a single oil lamp burning low in one window. Peaceful, ordinary. In 60 seconds, that peace would shatter into something Missouri would never forget. Ladd raised his arm, the device cold in his palm, and hurled it through the window. 3 in the morning, and the window exploded inward with a crash that woke the entire household. The iron ball hit the kitchen floor and rolled toward the center of the room, trailing smoke and sparks like a 4th of July rocket gone wrong. Zerelda Samuel bolted upright in bed, heard the hissing sound, smelled burning metal and chemicals. Dr. Samuel scrambled out of bed, saw the smoking object near the cast iron stove, and made a split-second decision that would cost him. He grabbed the device with both hands, searing pain, flesh burning on contact, and tried to throw it back out the broken window. His timing was off by 3 seconds. The fuse reached its end. The explosion ripped through the main room with a detonation that shook the foundation, a blast radius of 20 feet that turned furniture into shrapnel. Archie Samuel, sleeping in an adjacent room, caught the full force through the doorway. His small body was shredded by metal fragments. Death was instant, mercifully so. Zerelda's right arm, raised instinctively to shield her face as she ran toward her son, was mangled below the elbow. Bones shattered, tissue hanging in bloody strips. The cast-iron stove, anchored in place for years, was blown across the room like a cannonball and slammed into the far wall with enough force to crack the timber. The Pinkerton agents, positioned outside and expecting smoke and fleeing civilians, heard the explosion and understood immediately that something had gone catastrophically wrong. No smoke, no evacuation, just a blast that sounded like artillery. They fled immediately, horses already spooked by the noise. No capture, no confrontation. Just a dead child, a mutilated mother, and the beginning of a scandal that would destroy reputations and reshape American law enforcement forever. Archie Samuel was dead within seconds, his 8-year-old body carried to the bedroom by Dr. Samuel, whose burned hands left bloody prints on the doorframe and walls. Zerelda was bleeding out, screaming through shock and pain that cut through the winter night like a siren. Neighbors arrived within minutes. The explosion had woken half of Kearney, and farm families knew the sound of violence when they heard it. They found a scene that looked like battlefield aftermath, smoke hanging in the air, blood pooling on wooden floorboards, shattered glass glittering in lamplight, and the cast-iron stove blown 15 feet from its original position, lying on its side like a fallen monument. The local doctor arrived at dawn and made the only decision that would save Zerelda's life: amputation below the elbow. There wasn't anesthetic strong enough for what he had to do, just whiskey and leather to bite down on. She'd wear that empty sleeve for the rest of her life, a visible reminder of what the Pinkertons had done, displayed in every photograph, every public appearance, every interview. By sunrise, the Pinkerton agents were already on a train back to Chicago, mission accomplished in the worst possible way. The scene they left behind became a pilgrimage site for outrage. Kearney community members documented everything: the shattered window with glass fragments still embedded in the frame, the blood-soaked floorboards that would never quite come clean, the destroyed cast-iron stove now lying silent and scarred. Within hours, the story spread across Missouri telegraph lines like wildfire. Pinkertons bombed a family home, killed a child, maimed a mother. The agents had expected to terrorize one family. Instead, they'd ignited fury across an entire state. January 27th, 2 days after the bombing, and Jesse James was in Kentucky when the telegram arrived. The message was brief, brutal, impossible to misunderstand. Brother dead, mother maimed, Pinkertons. According to gang members who were present that morning, Jesse read it twice without expression, folded the paper carefully, then walked outside into the cold. When he returned an hour later, his face was stone. No tears, no rage, just cold calculation. He rode 200 miles in 18 hours, pushing his horse until it nearly collapsed, stopping only to switch mounts at safe houses along the way. By the time he reached the farm on January 28th, Zerelda's bandaged stump had already become the symbol everyone would remember. More powerful than any newspaper editorial, more damning than any investigation. Jesse walked into the house and saw his mother's arm gone, saw Archie's small coffin in the front room, saw the destroyed cast-iron stove still sitting in the corner where the blast had thrown it. Metal warped and blackened. People close to him said he stood there for 5 minutes without speaking, just staring at the stove as if it could explain what had happened. Then he made a vow, reported later by family members who were present: "This never ends now." Before the bombing, Jesse was a bank robber, a train thief, a Confederate guerrilla who'd never quite accepted the war's end. After, he became something darker, a man operating on pure vengeance with nothing left to lose. The Pinkertons thought they'd sent a message about the cost of protecting outlaws. What they actually did was remove the last restraint Jesse had, the last reason to ever consider mercy. National newspapers ran the story within 3 days. Pinkerton Massacre in Missouri. Editorial boards from New York to San Francisco condemned the raid as barbarism dressed up as law enforcement. The Missouri State Legislature opened an official investigation, calling witnesses and demanding answers. Governor Thomas Crittenden, no friend to outlaws and no sympathizer to the James Gang, called it an act of terror against civilians that shames our state. Alan Pinkerton, facing the worst public relations disaster of his career, issued a defensive statement calling the raid necessary action against dangerous criminals who have evaded justice for years. The public wasn't buying it. Letters poured into newspaper offices demanding accountability, asking questions that had no good answers. How does the most powerful detective agency in America justify bombing a farmhouse full of sleeping children? Pinkerton's defense crumbled under basic scrutiny. Was there a warrant? No. Was Jesse James present? No. Did agents attempt peaceful apprehension? No. Did anyone consider the presence of children? Apparently not. The cast iron stove, now a grotesque piece of evidence, was photographed and displayed at the Missouri Capitol. You could see the shrapnel damage, the scorch marks, the massive dent where it had hit the wall after being blown across the room. Jesse James, once America's most wanted outlaw, suddenly became a sympathetic figure in a way no amount of Robin Hood mythology could have achieved. Mothers who'd never supported crime looked at Zerelda's empty sleeve and saw themselves. Fathers imagined Archie's small coffin and thought of their own children. The transformation was stunning and immediate. The Pinkerton reputation, built on decades of professional detective work and high-profile cases like the Lincoln assassination, took damage it would never fully repair. Competitors referenced the bombing in advertisements. Journalists brought it up in profiles. The agency survived, continued operating, even thrived in some markets, but the stain never washed away. And somewhere in Missouri, Jesse James was planning his response. The bombing changed his psychology in ways that everyone around him noticed. He'd fought in the Civil War under Quantrill, seen friends die in ambushes, lived through Missouri's brutal guerrilla conflict where mercy was a luxury nobody could afford. But that was war, with rules everyone understood. This was different. This was his family, his home, his 8-year-old brother killed in his own bed by men who claimed to represent justice. They started the war again, Jesse allegedly told his gang, so we'll finish it. Between 1875 and 1876, Jesse's robberies became angrier, bloodier, more reckless. The calculated gentleman bandit who'd once apologized to passengers while robbing their train transformed into something vengeful. The Northfield, Minnesota raid in September 1876 was the bloodiest yet. Multiple deaths, chaos in the streets, a disaster that shattered the gang and sent Jesse into hiding for years. Zerelda played her role with fierce dedication. She displayed her empty sleeve publicly at every opportunity, gave interviews to any journalist who asked, turned her mutilation into propaganda more effective than any outlaw manifesto. She kept fragments of the destroyed cast iron stove as a memorial, showing them to visitors who wanted to understand what the Pinkertons had done to her family. The message was clear and devastating. This is what American law enforcement does to mothers and children. Jesse never forgave, never forgot, never stopped. The bombing had given him something more powerful than any amount of stolen money: moral justification. In his mind and in the minds of thousands of Missourians who lived through the Civil War and its aftermath, the Pinkertons had proven that the war never really ended, that Northern aggression still targeted Southern families, that resistance was not just justified but necessary. Alan Pinkerton never officially apologized for the bombing. In public statements over the following years, he maintained the raid was justified given Jesse James's criminal record and the threat he posed to railroad operations. Privately, his business suffered immediate consequences. Railroad companies, spooked by public backlash and negative press, quietly canceled contracts or chose not to renew them. The Pinkerton image shifted from legendary detective to hired enforcer, willing to bomb civilians for corporate interests. Congress debated regulating private detective agencies, though no federal law ultimately passed. The damage was reputational, not legal, but in the detective business, Reputation was everything. Alan Pinkerton died in 1884, 9 years after the raid, his legacy forever tied to that iron device thrown through a Missouri farmhouse window. Jesse James was killed on April 3, 1882, shot in the back by Robert Ford, a gang member who wanted reward money. Zerelda outlived her son by 29 years, surviving until 1911. She never stopped telling the story, displaying Archie's photograph, her empty sleeve, and stove fragments to anyone who visited. "They killed my boy for nothing," she'd say. "Jesse wasn't even here." The cast iron stove pieces became relics, museum objects, symbols of the night violence came home. Modern historians call the raid terrorism. The stove sits behind glass now, craters still visible in the metal. They came for an outlaw and created a legend, and that stove, ordinary, reliable, now shattered, stands as proof that sometimes the cost of justice is too high to pay.